She will be speaking to us on the post-pandemic. Will things change for the better or for worse? Let's hope for the better. Over to you, Patiswa. And she has a presentation to be projected. May you please put it up on the screen for her to make reference to. Welcome, Patiswa. Over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to see if you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Can see it. Okay. Can you scroll right up to the start? Yes, here. Perfect.
Patiswa, you have 7 minutes. Just remind you.
Okay, again, all right. Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. This is a moment for us to learn and share experiences. And one of the things that I want to go straight to is it's a very tricky sort of kind of topic that I've been assigned, because I'm looking at change and therefore the better or for worse and post-COVID-19. I think there's a need to contextualize the kind of change that we're talking about, and also looking at what we think represents better and what represents worse. If you look at the status quo of the news and media space, the problems that we see that the media is experiencing are not new, but have been aggravated by the COVID-19 impact. COVID-19 has exposed serious inadequacies in the media sector generally for the underreported communities and those in the periphery of society. The situation hasn't been good anyway. Also, if you look at the resourcing of the institutions themselves, media under-resourcing perpetuates information inequalities. Pre-COVID-19, we've seen an elitist and a classist allocation of resources and access to news and information. And what this means is that we have been neglecting those who are sitting in the periphery of society. And these are people who die in the shadows. And also looking at news and information as something that's a public good and not a privilege. COVID-19 has exposed a serious lack of investment in specialist skills and coverage, meaning that expert fields are not receiving the attention they deserve in news media coverage. Just look at health and medicine and science and innovation fields and the provision for these in the different newsrooms. To be able to ask pertinent questions and productive questions, you need to know what you're dealing with. So if you're not an expert in any of these fields, you are going to be found wanting. We've been fortunate at SABC News to have editors and reporters who are naturally curious, but it needs to go beyond curiosity. So you need the skills. Also looking at the orientation of our media, particularly news media. There's a lack of public orientation. And what becomes a problem is that the proximity to the state, corporate, and political machinery by the media deprives society of essential public affairs content that reflects the lived reality of citizens. And this cannot continue. And this is all pre-COVID-19. Also, the urban-centric and convenience-based coverage results in us providing content that has limited relevance and resonance with the majority that needs it. Yes, it is true that public affairs content is inherently economically inefficient because you don't get the kind of return on investments that you can count in rands and cents. But it provides value and positive externalities on society that go beyond economic transactions. And this is something worth considering. Also, the media tends to neglect its transformative and developmental value. And without any doubt, information is the glue that holds societies and nations together. And it is critical to facilitating human development and progress. This role cannot be underplayed. And therefore, media can't just decide to walk away from it because of what we call resource constraints. There has to be provision for that. So what is the change that we are looking for? And what is it that we need to consider, knowing what COVID-19 has exposed as the status quo? So we need change that adds value to citizens' lives and experiences. Not change for the sake of change, but change that's impactful and meaningful. And also, COVID-19 has redefined journalism and forced a back-to-values approach, something that we have been drifting away from. So basically, we are being taken back to the elements of journalism that are espoused by Kovach and Resential. And 3 of those are key. So we need to go back to reigniting journalism's first obligation, which is to the truth, because we need to commit to truth, and this is important for our credibility and relevance as news media. And we need to rekindle journalism's first loyalty to citizens. We need to be totally loyal to the citizenry of the countries that we are based in. And we also need to ensure that journalists maintain independence from those they cover. And this should be done without fear or favor. And this is something that I'm going to refer to as towards the end, because this is something that we are seeing coming up in different countries, and it's a serious threat to journalism that we are seeing a cap in media freedom. So what is the kind of future that we are looking for? Of these 5 points that I've shown here: public's right to know, relevance and responsiveness, incisive watchdog journalism, and resourcing of universal access. At the center of all of that, we need coordination, and this will be done through digital transformation. So the future of the media, in my view, knowing what we know now, as what existed before COVID-19 and where we are now with post-COVID-19 impact. So the future of the media is now. It's not tomorrow. So what has happened is that COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation. So we need to continue and emphasize the approach that we need to see content strategies through digital eyes. We're sitting here in a virtual setup, and we need to do more of this, but it's got to be of value to audiences and not just an operational issue within limited spaces like we're doing now. So we need digitally enabled news and information strategies that foster transparency and public accountability. So this is a critical issue, and we need to consider inclusive plurality, and this talks to one, representation in terms of the voices that dominate our news coverage. And you always hear this thing that the most affected section of the population in terms of what COVID-19 has done, it's women, but we hear less of women in our coverage. And we need that multiplicity of views, and we need to make an effort to make sure that all voices matter and all voices count. And one of the things that talk to inclusive plurality, it's language consideration. So effective communication can only be achieved if the message is relayed in languages that people understand. So predominantly English COVID-19 messaging from government and scientists excluded a majority of South Africans who rely on African languages. I don't know how the situation has been in other countries, but media platforms, as they rely on media platforms as in African languages as their primary source of news, particularly with radio. I mean, SABC is running about 18 radio stations, but we are servicing all official languages in the country. So once you don't provide for that segment in their own languages, it becomes a problem to really achieve effective communication. So this has been left to the media, particularly public service media like us, to mediate and translate technical, scientific, and medical terms into various African languages. While we can do that, but considering that newsrooms are not necessarily equipped for such demands, this poses a problem, particularly for a health pandemic, that you could end up with mistranslation that could lead to hysteria and putting people's lives at risk. So these are the dangers that come with translation, particularly in a health pandemic where you have technical expertise that's required in the newsroom that you don't necessarily have. So as a newsroom, we have had to be extra vigilant and take additional responsibility to ensure that the messages that we convey are accurate and relevant for the different audiences. But also the role of the media as transformative, incisive watchdog journalism cannot be understated. I mean, we still need credible, relevant, and responsive media. Responsive, I've had BB making reference to this. We really need to be responsive to the information and news needs of the different populations that we serve. It is critical for public trust and confidence. And also the other issue is to make sure that for us to be able to fulfill our role as watchdogs, we need appropriately resourced media enterprises. Cutting back on news media resources undermines the very existence of journalism. It diminishes its role in pursuing public and corporate accountability, which is central to the role of the media. And this is my concluding point.
Okay.
If you look at the free flow of information which is the point I was referring to, and the need for journalists to have the right space to exercise their craft. Free flow of information and the public's rights to know have to be guaranteed. State brutality against journalists and the suppression of media freedom that is being experienced by media professionals in different parts of the continent is atrocious and detrimental to the development and strengthening of our democracies. And we cannot keep quiet about it and hope that it is going to disappear by itself. This must come to an end. Citizens must take a stand in defense of the public's right to know, and this has been more critical during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's going to continue to be so as we start to see the fallout, the socio-economic fallout from the impact and the dislocation of different segments of society as a result of that impact. But as Alan Rasbridger puts it, power needs witnesses, and witnesses need to be able to speak freely to an audience. The truth can only flow on from agreed facts. Facts can only be agreed to if they can be openly articulated, tested, and contested. And I add, without any hindrance. So the issue of media freedom and independence of media houses from government and corporate establishments is key for the citizens to get what they need to know in terms of news and information. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for highlighting some really pertinent points around suppression of the media and threats to our democracies, but more importantly, a look at the brutality to the citizenry without no fear, no favor. Journalists have to go back to the values approach and really get back to the roots. Why do journalists and the media exist? Is to communicate the right information with the truth that cannot be bent so that the masses benefit from this kind of information across the board at all levels, in rural, in the cities, in urban areas, because indeed there's a bias. Language use as well as accessibility of the type of media. So once again, thank you very much. And moving right along to Ms. Nia Malan. Ms. Nia Malan is the Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director of Becky Sisa. I wish I knew what that meant. Here in South Africa. She's going to be talking to us on the credible sources of information, the role of media startups, and the media landscape post-COVID-19. Over to you, Mia.
Thank you very much, Bibi. And to answer your question, Bekisisa is a isiZulu word in South Africa that means to scrutinize. And if a Zulu patient goes to a doctor and wants to be checked out really well by the doctor, the Zulu patient will ask, can you Bekisisa me? So that's where we come from. So to get to the credible sources of information during COVID, I think one of the biggest challenges during fast-moving epidemics like COVID-19 is access to credible information and sources of information. And it's really important because, as we've seen in COVID, misinformation during an epidemic like this has the ability to be lethal. It can destroy communities and literally lead to loss of life. But with COVID, something else that we've seen is one of the consequences of operating in an environment where the need for information on potential treatments and vaccines is so urgent. One of the consequences is that the publication of research is fast-tracked, which means that scientists skip traditional peer-reviewed processes to publish their research faster in the form of preprints. And this has created a lot of challenges for the media, especially because COVID has changed all journalists into health journalists practically overnight, but without equipping them with the scientific knowledge to evaluate whether a particular study's results is credible or not, or whether the study's design is appropriate for the kind of results that the researchers claim to have come up with. And this has resulted in preprint results, often in the media, being presented as the gospel, just for it to be proven wrong 2 weeks later and causing a lot of confusion. Now, in terms of credible sources for information, I think the biggest immediate challenge for the media for credible information will be in the form of vaccine knowledge, because within the next couple of months we'll see a lot of progress with vaccine trials, and we'll also see some vaccines becoming available within the next 2 years or so. Now, the challenge is that vaccine science is complex, and it will be detrimental if we as the media report on it incorrectly, because we will create either false hope, or if we underplay the effectiveness of vaccines within the context of a growing lobby of anti-vaxxers that will no doubt become more prominent once effective vaccines become available, because we'd really like people to then take up the vaccines. So I think now more than ever is the time to equip journalists with knowledge through trainings and webinars, and luckily during the period of COVID, it's become easier to present trainings because we got used to webinars and digital training more than previously. And I think it's also a real good opportunity that's presented, because political and business journalists who may never have been interested in this type of science journalism training if there wasn't an epidemic will now be open to it. And an example is a training that Bekesisa hosted in August and July for journalists in Africa on epidemiology. And of our 63 participants, 2/3 were not health journalists. They were political journalists, general journalists, and business journalists. And that the epidemiological knowledge will now stay with them beyond COVID-19, which is a long-term impact that because we took an opportunity during a time that journalists would be more open to this. In terms of what the COVID-19 media landscape would look like, I think the economic model of the media was broken long before COVID. COVID really just accelerated what was already there. We've seen considerable loss of income, and as a result, the closing down of publications and many, many job losses. Just here in South Africa alone, about 700 media professionals lost their jobs the past 6 months, and 2 large publications and 80 smaller publications closed down entirely. I think we are therefore going to see a rather fast increase in reader revenue models in the form of membership and to subscription models, and also combination funding models that rely on a combination of advertising, of reader revenue, and philanthropic support. I believe in terms of philanthropic support, donor-funded journalism is going to start to play an increasingly important role for 2 reasons. Firstly, it can provide cash-stripped mainstream media organizations with content for free now that they really don't have the money to appoint more reporters. But secondly, a point that relates to what Patricio was saying, it can provide them with specialist content. We don't have enough specialist reporters, and particularly science-based health content. And that's the type of content that is more expensive to produce than general news, because specialist skills normally come at a higher price than general skills. And a clear need for that was generated during COVID-19. I think we will also see more and more donor-funded media startups that will specialize in niche content, including more fact-checking and data journalism outlets within the context of so much misinformation that we're currently seeing. But this will come with a challenge, with a significant requirement for skills.
Wide-ranging discussion there on the media landscape post-COVID-19 hosted by the African Union Development Agency, and speaker after speaker spoke about the importance of community